the summer of 1870, the European powers were faced with an impending war that would redefine the continent. The Kingdom of Prussia, under the leadership of Chancellor Otto von Bismarck, was on the brink of realizing a long-held dream, the unification of the German states. But standing in its way was France, a former European hegemon led by Emperor Napoleon III, who sought to maintain France's influence. The war that followed would not only change the fate of these two nations, but would also have profound consequences for the entire European order. Welcome to the War Vault. The unification of Germany and the rise of Prussia. The roots of the Franco-Prussian War can be traced back to the question of German unification. For centuries, the German-speaking states in Central Europe had been fragmented and divided, with the region being part of the larger Holy Roman Empire, and later the German Confederation, a loose alliance of German-speaking states. Among these states, Prussia, the most powerful and militarily advanced, had long sought to unify the German states under its leadership. By the 1860s, Prussia, led by King Wilhelm I and his ambitious Prime Minister Otto von Bismarck, had become a dominant force in Europe. Bismarck, a master strategist, sought to unify the German states through a combination of military victories and diplomatic maneuvering. His goal was to create a German empire under Prussian leadership, and he believed that the key to achieving this was to provoke a war with France. The Franco-Prussian War would ultimately provide the catalyst for this unification. In 1866, Bismarck orchestrated the Austro-Prussian War, which resulted in the defeat of Austria and the exclusion of Austria from German affairs. This victory allowed Prussia to form the North German Confederation, a powerful union of northern German states under Prussian control. However, the southern German states, including Bavaria, Baden, and Württemberg, remained independent and were not yet part of the Confederation. Bismarck believed that he needed the southern German states' support to fully unify Germany, and this would require the support, or at the very least, the neutrality of France. The role of France and Napoleon III. The French Empire under Napoleon III had a complicated relationship with the German states. While France had long been a dominant European power, its influence had waned following the Napoleonic Wars and the restoration of the Bourbon monarchy in France. Napoleon III, the nephew of Napoleon Bonaparte, had come to power in 1848 after a period of political instability, and he sought to restore French prestige and power on the continent. To achieve this, he needed to secure his position at the head of a French-dominated European order. Napoleon III was particularly concerned with the growing power of Prussia. The prospect of a united Germany under Prussian leadership posed a direct threat to French influence in Europe, particularly in the Rhineland, which had been a historically important region for both France and Germany. Furthermore, the idea of a powerful and unified German state in the heart of Europe was seen as destabilizing to the existing European balance of power. Napoleon III believed that maintaining France's influence required stopping Prussia's ambitions for unification, but at the same time, he was hesitant to engage in a direct conflict that might risk France's position. In the years leading up to the war, tensions between France and Prussia escalated. Napoleon III was particularly concerned about Prussia's growing dominance in the North German Confederation and its influence over the southern German states. He saw Prussia as a threat to the French position in Europe and believed that if Germany were unified under Prussian leadership, France would be surrounded by a powerful adversary. As a result, Napoleon III began to consider a more aggressive foreign policy to curtail Prussia's rise. The Hohenzollern candidacy and Bismarck's manipulation. The immediate cause of the war can be traced to the candidacy of Leopold von Hohenzollern, a member of the Prussian royal family, for the Spanish throne. In 1869, the Spanish Queen Isabella II had been deposed, and Spain sought a new king. Leopold, a relative of King Wilhelm I of Prussia, was proposed as a candidate for the Spanish throne. The French government, under Napoleon III, viewed this as a direct challenge to its influence in Europe. If Leopold were to become King of Spain, France would find itself surrounded by two powerful German-speaking states, Prussia to the north and Spain to the south. Napoleon III demanded that King Wilhelm I of Prussia withdraw his relative's candidacy. Bismarck, ever the tactician, saw an opportunity to use this crisis to his advantage. He recognized that a war with France could unite the German states under Prussia's leadership. Bismarck also knew that Napoleon III would be eager to prevent the rise of a united Germany and would likely take the bait. In response to Napoleon's demands, King Wilhelm I of Prussia agreed to withdraw Leopold's candidacy. However, Bismarck saw that this diplomatic maneuver could be used to provoke France into declaring war. He skillfully edited a telegram sent by Wilhelm I, known as the Ems Dispatch, to make it appear as though the Prussian king had insulted the French ambassador. This edited version of the telegram was released to the press, enraging the French public and government, and pushing Napoleon III to take the final step toward war. France declares war, the opening shots. On July 19, 1870, after a series of diplomatic provocations, Napoleon III declared war on Prussia. The French emperor believed that France's military superiority would quickly crush Prussia and prevent the unification of Germany. However, Napoleon III misjudged the situation. The Prussian army was better organized, better equipped, and more modern than the French forces, and Bismarck had successfully united the German states under Prussian leadership. The declaration of war was met with enthusiasm in Prussia, where the war was seen as an opportunity to solidify the unification of Germany. The North German Confederation quickly mobilized its forces, and Prussia's allies in the southern German states, including Bavaria and Baden, were drawn into the conflict. The Prussian army, led by General Helmuth von Moltke the Elder, was ready for battle, and the war would soon turn into a rapid and decisive conflict that would change the course of European history. The early stages of the war, Prussian success. From the outset of the war, the Prussian military quickly demonstrated its superiority. The Prussian army, utilizing the latest technologies in communication, railway transport, and artillery, moved swiftly through France. The French, by contrast, were plagued by poor coordination and outdated tactics. The early engagements, such as the Battle of Wissembourg, August 4, 1870, and the Battle of Spickeren, August 6, 1870, saw decisive victories for the Prussians. The most significant engagement of the war came at the Battle of Sedan on September 1, 1870. The French army, led by Napoleon III, was decisively defeated by the Prussian forces. Napoleon III was captured, and the French government collapsed. The French emperor's capture marked the end of the Second French Empire and led to the establishment of the Third Republic in France. The defeat at Sedan, followed by the fall of Paris after a lengthy siege, left France in a state of political and military collapse. The Prussian victory over France was swift and devastating, and it was clear that the Franco-Prussian War would result in the unification of Germany under Prussian leadership. The war not only marked the fall of the French Empire, but also signaled the rise of a new German empire, which would alter the European balance of power for the next century. The Franco-Prussian War, fought from 1870 to 1871, was a conflict that significantly reshaped Europe, resulting in the unification of Germany and the fall of the French Empire. The war, despite lasting only about 6 months, was a fast-moving, decisive conflict. It involved critical battles that demonstrated Prussia's military superiority, culminating in the collapse of the French government and the creation of a new European power structure. The early defeats of France were followed by a series of sieges and brutal confrontations, with each turning point moving the war toward a decisive conclusion. The early stages of war, initial French failures. The war began with the French declaration of hostilities against Prussia on July 19, 1870, but the French army was ill-prepared for the Prussian military machine. Napoleon III and his generals had underestimated the efficiency of Prussia's military mobilization and its superior tactics. Despite France's larger population and military resources, the Prussian army was more modernized and technologically advanced, particularly in terms of artillery and communication. The Battle of Wissembourg, August 4th, 1870. The first major clash of the Franco-Prussian War occurred at Wissembourg in northeastern France, where the Prussian forces under General Auguste von Werder confronted a smaller French army. The French, taken by surprise, were forced to retreat, suffering heavy casualties. This early defeat signaled to both sides that the war would not be a quick one, and it marked the beginning of a series of tactical advantages for the Prussians. The Battle of Spickeren, August 6th, 1870. Only 2 days after Wissembourg, Prussian forces achieved another victory at the Battle of Spickeren near the French border. The French had been hoping to defend their positions, but the Prussians, with their superior artillery and efficient communications, easily overwhelmed them. The rapid Prussian victories caught France off guard, and morale in the French army began to deteriorate. Despite these initial setbacks, Napoleon III was determined to defend his empire. But Prussia's ability to mobilize and coordinate its army far exceeded France's expectations. By this time, the Prussian forces were already making their way deeper into French territory. The Battle of Sedan, the fall of Napoleon III. The Battle of Sedan, September 1st, 1870, was the pivotal battle that would determine the outcome of the war and the fate of Napoleon III's empire. It occurred near the French town of Sedan, where Napoleon III's army had positioned itself in an attempt to launch a counter-offensive against Prussia. However, Napoleon's forces were quickly surrounded by a superior Prussian force, led by General Helmuth von Moltke. The French army, after a series of miscalculations and poor tactical decisions, found itself trapped and unable to maneuver. Napoleon III, trying to avoid further slaughter, decided to surrender, effectively ending the war for France. His capture by Prussian forces sent shockwaves through Europe. The French army was destroyed, and the Second French Empire collapsed within hours. The immediate consequences of the Battle of Sedan were catastrophic for France. Napoleon III, the French emperor, was taken prisoner, and the French government, unable to continue the war under imperial rule, collapsed, giving rise to the French Third Republic. This moment marked the first real breakthrough for Prussia, and the way was now clear for the unification of Germany. The Siege of Paris, the struggle continues. Although Napoleon III had been captured, the war was far from over. The collapse of the imperial government did not mean an immediate surrender for the French people. A new republican government was quickly formed in Paris, and it declared that it would continue the fight against Prussia. The French were determined to defend their capital and maintain a semblance of resistance. The Siege of Paris, September 19th, 1870 to January 28th, 1871. The Prussians quickly turned their attention to Paris, the heart of the French government and the symbol of French power. Beginning in mid-September 1870, the Prussian forces, now under the unified command of General von Moltke, began to lay siege to Paris. The French defenders, under the leadership of General Trochu, attempted to put up a strong resistance, but Paris was increasingly isolated. French supply lines were cut off, and the inhabitants of Paris were soon facing severe food shortages, harsh conditions, and disease. During the siege, the French government called upon the population of Paris to rally behind the defense of the city, but the situation quickly deteriorated. The French attempted several breakout attempts, but each failed miserably, and the Prussian siege continued to tighten. By the beginning of January 1871, conditions in Paris were dire, with starvation and disease taking their toll on both soldiers and civilians. Ultimately, after nearly 4 months of siege, the French defenders had no choice but to surrender on January 28th, 1871. The Prussian victory in the Siege of Paris marked the end of the war, but the terms of surrender were harsh. The French were required to pay a heavy indemnity of 5 billion francs, and the Prussians demanded the cession of the provinces of Alsace and Lorraine, a bitter blow to French pride. The unification of Germany, birth of the German Empire. While the Siege of Paris was still ongoing, the political ramifications of the war were already being felt in Germany. The Prussian victory in the war had united the North German Confederation and the Southern German states under Prussian leadership, paving the way for the proclamation of the German Empire. The proclamation of the German Empire, January the 18th, 1871. On January 18th, 1871, in the Hall of Mirrors at the Palace of Versailles, King Wilhelm I of Prussia was crowned Kaiser, Emperor of Germany. This symbolic event marked the culmination of Bismarck's efforts to unify the German-speaking states under Prussian leadership, and it officially created the German Empire. The unification was not only a military and diplomatic triumph for Prussia, but also a shift in the European balance of power. Bismarck had skillfully manipulated the war with France to unite the northern and southern German states. By provoking French aggression and turning the conflict into a war of national unity, he was able to bring the southern states like Bavaria and Baden into the fold of a new German empire. The result was the birth of a unified, industrialized, and militarily formidable German state, which would soon become the dominant power in Europe. The Treaty of Frankfurt, the end of the war. The formal end of the Franco-Prussian War came with the signing of the Treaty of Frankfurt on May 10th, 1871. The terms of the treaty were extremely harsh for France. In addition to the loss of Alsace and Lorraine, France was forced to pay the massive indemnity of 5 billion francs. The payment of this indemnity was not only financially devastating for France, but also left a lasting bitterness between the two nations. Alsace and Lorraine, rich in resources and strategically important, were ceded to Germany. This territorial loss became a sore point for the French, who were humiliated by their defeat. The return of these provinces to France would become a key political issue in the years that followed, fueling a desire for revenge that would be realized in the early 20th century. The Treaty of Frankfurt was a monumental shift in the European order. It confirmed the rise of Germany as the dominant power in Europe and the fall of France as a leading military and political force. The power vacuum created by the defeat of France would set the stage for new alliances, rivalries, and conflicts in the coming decades. The legacy of the war. The Franco-Prussian War had profound consequences for both France and Germany. For Germany, the victory led to the unification of the German states and the establishment of the German Empire. The war also marked the beginning of a period of German dominance in European affairs. Bismarck's diplomatic policies ensured that Germany would remain a major power, and the empire's military prowess was unmatched for much of the late 19th century. For France, the war resulted in humiliation, territorial loss, and a shattered national pride. The French Third Republic, which emerged from the ashes of the Second Empire, was left to pick up the pieces of a broken nation. The loss of Alsace and Lorraine would remain a contentious issue between France and Germany, setting the stage for future conflict. The legacy of the Franco-Prussian War was felt throughout Europe. The unification of Germany shifted the balance of power, and the newfound strength of the German Empire altered European politics for decades. The Franco-Prussian War set the stage for the alliances and tensions that would culminate in World War I. The Franco-Prussian War, despite lasting only a few months, had profound consequences for both the nations involved and the broader European order. The creation of the German Empire marked the end of the French Empire and the beginning of a new European balance of power. The war's aftermath was filled with both immediate and long-lasting consequences. For France, humiliation and the loss of territory. For Germany, the emergence of a unified, powerful empire at the heart of Europe. The effects of the war would resonate for decades, shaping European politics and ultimately contributing to the outbreak of World War I, the creation of the German Empire. The most immediate and significant consequence of the Franco-Prussian War was the unification of Germany. Prior to the war, Germany had been a fragmented collection of independent states. These states were loosely united under the German Confederation, a political entity created after the Napoleonic Wars. Prussia had long been the dominant force within the Confederation, but the southern German states, Bavaria, Baden, and Württemberg, remained independent and neutral during the conflict between Prussia and France. Bismarck, the mastermind behind the unification process, had carefully orchestrated the war to achieve his goal of a unified Germany. His diplomatic brilliance, combined with Prussia's military victories, created a situation where the southern German states could no longer remain independent. The defeat of France and the subsequent Treaty of Frankfurt ensured that Prussia's dominance in the new German Empire would be absolute. On January 18th, 1871, in the Hall of Mirrors at the Palace of Versailles, the German Empire was proclaimed. King Wilhelm I of Prussia was crowned Kaiser, Emperor of Germany, marking the culmination of Bismarck's long efforts to unify the German-speaking peoples under a single banner. The unification was not the result of a popular uprising, but rather a calculated diplomatic and military strategy, with Prussia leading the way. The newly unified German Empire was a federal monarchy, with the Kaiser as the symbolic head of state, though real power remained in the hands of the Chancellor. Bismarck, who had played a crucial role in orchestrating the war and shaping the new empire. The new German state was composed of the North German Confederation, which had been formed in 1866 after the Austro-Prussian War, and the southern German states of Bavaria, Baden, and Württemberg. The unification of Germany was a dramatic shift in the European balance of power, as the German Empire quickly became one of the most powerful military and industrial forces on the continent. France, humiliation, and the birth of the Third Republic. For France, the aftermath of the war was marked by national humiliation, political upheaval, and deep resentment. The loss of the war had devastating effects on the French psyche. The Treaty of Frankfurt, signed on May 10, 1871, imposed harsh terms on France. In addition to the heavy indemnity of 5 billion francs that France was required to pay to Germany, France had to cede the territories of Alsace and Lorraine to the newly created German Empire. These provinces, rich in resources and strategically important, were both culturally and historically significant to France. The loss of Alsace-Lorraine was seen as a national tragedy, and it left a lasting bitterness that would fuel French nationalism and the desire for revenge in the years to come. The French military was left in disarray after the war, and the once proud French Empire was destroyed. Napoleon III was captured during the Battle of Sedan and exiled, ending the Second French Empire. In the wake of Napoleon III's defeat, the French Third Republic was established in 1870. However, the birth of the Third Republic was not without its difficulties. The country faced internal divisions, economic hardship, and the humiliation of war. The new government had to contend with the challenge of rebuilding a nation that had been severely wounded both militarily and politically. The war left France in a vulnerable position. The Third Republic faced significant challenges in maintaining order and stability, especially with the growing threat of the conservative forces that had supported the monarchy. The loss of Alsace and Lorraine was particularly painful, and it was a wound that would remain open in French politics for decades. The desire for revenge, would fuel French military and foreign policy in the coming years, and it played a key role in the lead-up to World War I. The balance of power in Europe, Germany's rise. The unification of Germany had a profound impact on the European balance of power. Prior to the war, France had been one of the dominant powers in Europe. However, with the rise of the German Empire, France's position was severely weakened. The new German Empire was industrially advanced, militarily powerful, and strategically located at the heart of Europe. Bismarck's careful diplomacy ensured that Germany was not isolated diplomatically, and the new empire was able to secure its position as the preeminent power in Central Europe. Germany's rise was a direct challenge to the established powers in Europe, particularly France, Britain, and Austria-Hungary. The creation of a unified Germany upset the delicate balance of power that had existed in Europe since the Napoleonic Wars. Bismarck, ever the pragmatist, sought to maintain peace in Europe by forming a series of alliances designed to keep France isolated. He signed a secret treaty with Russia in 1873, which became known as the Three Emperors League, and later secured a treaty with Austria-Hungary. Bismarck's diplomatic acumen allowed Germany to avoid immediate conflict and consolidate its power. However, Germany's rise to prominence was not without consequences. France, humiliated by its defeat, sought to rebuild its military strength, and it established new alliances to counter the growing power of Germany. The Franco-German rivalry, fueled by the loss of Alsace and Lorraine, would continue to shape European diplomacy for decades, setting the stage for the tensions that would lead to World War I. The long-term effects on European diplomacy. The unification of Germany and the collapse of the French Empire also had significant effects on European diplomacy. The war fundamentally altered the balance of power in Europe, leading to new alliances and rivalries that would have long-lasting consequences. One of the most important outcomes of the war was the formation of the Triple Alliance between Germany, Austria-Hungary, and Italy. Bismarck sought to ensure that Germany would remain the dominant power in Europe, and the Triple Alliance was designed to isolate France and prevent any potential coalitions against Germany. The alliance system that emerged from this period would lay the groundwork for the complex web of diplomacy that would characterize the early 20th century. On the other hand, France, having been isolated diplomatically after its defeat, sought to rebuild its position by forming new alliances. France eventually secured an alliance with Russia in 1894, which became the Franco-Prussian Alliance. This alliance was primarily a response to the growing power of Germany and Austria-Hungary. Over time, this system of alliances would lead to the creation of the Triple Entente, which included France, Russia, and Britain, and set the stage for the tensions and hostilities that would culminate in World War I. A legacy of resentment, Alsace-Lorraine, and French nationalism. The loss of Alsace and Lorraine to Germany was one of the most enduring consequences of the Franco-Prussian War. These territories had long been a source of pride for the French, and their loss created a sense of national humiliation that persisted throughout the late 19th and early 20th centuries. The desire to reclaim Alsace-Lorraine became a central part of French nationalist sentiment and a key issue in French politics. This sentiment would play a significant role in shaping the policies of the French government in the years leading up to World War I. The loss of Alsace and Lorraine also had a profound impact on Franco-German relations. The territories became a symbol of German power and French defeat, and their eventual recovery became a matter of national honor for France. The desire for revanche would drive French foreign policy in the early 20th century, particularly during the period of intense tension leading up to World War I. The war's lasting impact, the Franco-Prussian War of 1870 to 1871, was a pivotal moment in European history, shaping the continent's political landscape for the decades that followed. The war led to the unification of Germany, the downfall of the French Empire, and the emergence of a new European order. The creation of the German Empire was a significant shift in the balance of power, and Germany's rise to dominance fundamentally altered European diplomacy. For France, the war was a humiliating defeat that left the country weakened, both politically and militarily. The loss of Alsace and Lorraine remained a bitter memory, and the desire for revenge played a crucial role in shaping France's foreign policy in the years leading up to World War I. The war's legacy of resentment and the complex web of alliances that emerged in its aftermath set the stage for the global conflict that would engulf Europe just over 4 decades later. The Franco-Prussian War, though relatively short, had profound and lasting effects on Europe. The unification of Germany, the collapse of the French Empire, and the new balance of power would all play significant roles in shaping the trajectory of the 20th century. The war's aftermath would continue to affect European diplomacy and ultimately contribute to the tensions that led to World War I. For more deep dives into pivotal moments in history, make sure to subscribe to the War Vault. Like, share, and stay tuned for more stories from the wars that changed the world.